Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's nice to see almost half a full hall on a rainy Saturday morning for us to be here today in this event to hear and to learn more on character building and values education. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Farah Mahmoud Al-Junaid from the Education and Youth Development Unit in MOIS. And on my left, which I shall share a little bit more further, is Dr. Salih Yucel, our speaker for today. Allow me to share that it is a great pleasure to have with us, apart from all the participants, also the President of the Islamic Council of Singapore, our council members, secretary, as well as the directors for the Turkish Cultural Center, as well as the MOIS Academy, who is jointly organizing today's event. As you all know, the Turkish Cultural Center is very active in promoting not only Turkish-related cultural activities, but also in the areas of education and social and community affairs and activities. And not forgetting, of course, the MOIS Academy is the MOIS's arm for training and development of our Muslim stakeholders, particularly our teachers, our leaders, our mosque members and community leaders, by conducting talks, conferences, introducing new discourses, and exposing us to emerging issues that is very much at the forefront of the community as well as our country, Singapore. So without much ado, and I will keep the suspense, I will introduce a little bit more about Dr. Yucel afterwards. Let us begin with the opening video that shares a little bit more about character education and values education.
His name is Fethullah Gülen. He is a 69-year-old Turkish Islamic scholar and author, apparently in poor health, who came to the U.S. seeking medical treatment. He lives a secluded life at a retreat in Pennsylvania. So why was he voted by his admirers in a survey by Foreign Policy magazine as the most significant intellectual in the world? Among those admirers are Kemal Aksus and Alp Aslandoğan.
Kind, modest, humble, generous. We see him as a source of information, inspiration, but never profit. He will be the one who will be troubled the most if he hears that followers or inspirers see him kind of profit.
Personally, he is definitely very knowledgeable, very sincere in wanting the best for the people, not just Turkey, but for all humanity.
Gulen has inspired his followers to build schools, provide humanitarian aid, and engage in interfaith dialogue. University of Houston professor Helen Ebaugh, who wrote a book on the Gulen movement, says the movement got its start when Gulen was an imam in Turkey.
When Fethullah Gülen began preaching in the late 60s and early 70s in Turkey, his message was, we don't need more madrasas. We need schools that will promote science and math and secular subjects. And his contention was that one can be modern and one can be scientific and still be a good Muslim.
Bill Martin is a senior fellow in religion and public policy at the James Baker Institute at Rice University. He says the Gulen movement is different from fundamentalist Islam because they respect all faiths and believe religion is compatible with science.
I think it's fair to say that Islam has had difficulty in coming to terms with modernity. And in that, I think that the Gulen movement offers a much more positive picture of what Islam can be.
Gulen inspired volunteers from Turkey bring Turkish language and culture with them. In Houston, they sponsor a Turkish Olympiad where American students compete in Turkish dance and song. The winners compete in an annual competition in Ankara, Turkey. There are more than 1,000 Gulen-inspired schools and universities in over 100 countries.
Gulen has always emphasized education, and that really lies at the core of this movement. To be a good Muslim meant to be well educated, and to be a good Muslim who participated in modernity meant to be conversant and well educated in science, math, and technology.
Education helps you overcome ignorance, poverty, corruption, hate, extremism, racism, whatever, all the illnesses of the society. Because of that, education is very important.
I need another number, a big number.
In Texas, there are 33 nationally recognized public charter schools with over 16,000 students, grades K through 12. They're called Harmony schools, and the Turkish superintendent insists they are strictly secular and in no way connected to Gulen. Professor Ibas says there's a reason for this kind of sensitivity.
I think a lot of that is related to the Islamophobia that exists in this country. I think there's a lot of fear, that Islam is trying to take hold of this country and countries around the world, that it's trying to spread itself.
About 60% of the kids in the Texas Harmony schools come from disadvantaged neighborhoods. The schools say they have a 100% graduation rate. No wonder there are 21,000 kids on the waiting list.
I think the Harmony schools are an outstanding example of what the Gulen followers have been able to accomplish, and particularly with respect to education. Of the 3 high schools that had graduating seniors this year, only 3 students had not already been admitted to a 4-year college by the time of graduation.
I know teachers who stay up here for 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, who are also working at night from home.
They know our expectations for them. Through kindergarten all the way to the high school, they know, hey, this is a college school. This is our goal is to get you into college.
I have never worked harder, but you really see the results because the parents are very involved, the kids really respond.
Gülen, not only he urges teachers to go and work at these schools, on the other hand, he urges people from all walks of life to go and support all these schools. Build up schools instead of mosques. Build up universities instead of mosques. Build up cultural centers, interfaith organizations, aid organizations, hospitals instead of mosques.
Supporters say Gulen owns nothing himself, but has persuaded others to give generously to many independent organizations.
The movement has become quite wealthy. It's one of the richest movements in Turkey. It has private hospitals, it has all these private schools. There's a big media industry, one of the biggest in Turkey. It has a Zaman newspaper. Kimse Yakmu is one of the latest. That's their relief organization. They help disaster victims all over the world.
Kimse Yakmu and in the U.S., Helping Hands contribute millions of dollars in humanitarian aid each year. Professor Ibas says in Turkey, Gulen urged businessmen to grow their businesses and give a part of their earnings, as much as a third, to support humanitarian aid and education.
The movement is financed not only by these wealthy businessmen, but more importantly, it's financed by everybody in the movement. Everybody contributes. And the average seems to be about 10%.
I go beyond the expected level in my income level. And for all of this, my motivation is that just like God loves us as human beings, we also should act in a manner that is pleasing to God. And I believe that all of these actions, charitable donations, volunteerism, are pleasing to God. That is why I'm doing all of this.
Alp is a volunteer in charge of the Institute for Interfaith Dialogue in Houston, which is located in the Raindrop Turkish House. This is a mock-up of the projected Interfaith Center, which will include a Jewish synagogue, a mosque, and a Christian church. Gulen has always stressed the importance of interfaith dialogue to promote peace, and has met with Pope John Paul II and reached out to leaders of many religious minorities. And he may have been the first Muslim leader to condemn the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
He immediately posted an ad clearly saying that this is an non-Islamic act. It is not even a human act. Those people who committed this, not Muslim, they cannot even be called humans. He said Bin Laden is a monster, and people around him are monsters if they think like him.
Alp Aslandoan says Gulen teaches that suicide attacks cannot be justified in Islam.
Some people try to justify the killings, homicidal killings, by saying that those people who are engaged in those, they don't have any other means. And he said that this is not a Muslim's view. It cannot be a Muslim's thinking. Because for a Muslim, if the end result, if the end goal is virtuous, worthwhile, holy, then the mechanism, then the means should also be holy.
Professor Ibas says the movement could do better by placing women in leadership roles. Gulen is not without his critics.
The big issue in Turkey for the critics is a fear that the movement is becoming very powerful, very wealthy, and that there's a sub rosa agenda to create an Islamic state. And they always compare it to Khomeini in Iran.
I think there's no warrant to the charges that Gulen wants to take over and impose Sharia law. I think that, frankly, is an absurd fear.
The movement is neither sect or cult. It is a civil society movement.
Sometimes they are accused of being a missionary, a missionizing entity. And as far as I know, I don't know of anyone through the schools or otherwise that they have tried to turn into a Muslim.
For the time being, those who follow Gulen, both critics and admirers, seem to agree that he is leading one of the most important movements in Islam. For Religion and Ethics News Weekly, I'm Lucky Severson in Houston.
Documentary that was made on the Gulen movement and the activities that they're doing, particularly not only in America but also across the world. For today, inshallah, we will be sharing or hearing a little bit more from Dr. Yucel on the character building and values education based on Fethullah Gülen's model. Allow me to share a little bit on the talk that Dr. Yucel will be sharing, and then I will give you a little bit more info on the man himself. Today's talk will be covering on how the role of education in developing a good human being, and that how character education, value education, plays a very important role in developing a holistic person, and that moral and ethical values should be one of the key, if not the foundation for education. Dr. Yucel will also elaborate further on Gulen's educational model, which advocates modeling and as well as teaching of modern and scientific education, as you've seen in the video. He will also share a little bit more on the role of Gulen himself, and I will quote a key principle in the teaching that Gulen believes of moral education, in which he says, the moral development of a student does not depend primarily on explicit character education efforts, but on the maturity and ethical capacities of adults with whom they interact. And such, it is not just incumbent on the program that we develop for our children, but also on the very teachers who are interacting, who spends a lot of time with the students. I shall not try to do justice or injustice to Dr. Yucel's 7-page CV, mashallah. He comes with a very long list and a very long experience, deep experience in community activities or services, of which I asked him, Doctor, shall I call you a community activist? And he said, no, call me a community servant. Yeah. He has been in Australia since 1987, and he has participated in many, in multiple roles in the community itself, very active. He had attained his doctorate of ministry from the School of Theology in Boston University in September 2007, and he's currently a senior lecturer in Islamic Studies at the Center for Studies in Religion and Theology, Monash University, since 2008. A consultant in the Australian Interfaith Intercultural Society, Dr. Yucel's current research areas looks into contemporary Islam, particularly the Gulen movement, as well as Muslim migrants in Australia post-World War II. So with that, I invite Dr. Yucel.
Well, assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. For those who do not understand the meaning of assalamu alaikum, actually you live in a country, everyone probably understand that. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. First of all, I would like to thank MUIS and Turkish Cultural Center for having me here to talk about this topic. I am here not just to talk about it, also to listen from you as well. Your comment, your questions is very important for me, whether during the event or after the event. Please feel free to ask any questions or do any comment, and I'll tell my shortcomings and mistakes. When we talk about the Gülen, I think the first thing comes to my mind, you know, the first pillar of Islam is Shahada. The Shahada, I bear witness that there's only one God, I bear witness that Muhammad is messenger of God. In Arabic, we say, وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا عَبْدُهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. The Gülen's definition of that, the last sentence, it is very interesting. He says, وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا عَبْدُهُ. Abd means servant of Allah, coming before Rasuluh, messengerhood. You know, in Islamic theology, those who know Islam, they know that in the highest point, they are the prophets. But here it's interesting, the servanthood is coming before prophethood. Why? Then he says that servanthood means to represent Islam comes before the convey message of Islam. To represent properly comes before the messengerhood. Why? Because even Prophet himself, he represented Islam before he preached. Whatever he preached, he represented, he practiced, he applied, and then he conveyed the message. So about Gülen's view, some of them you already heard about from the public broadcasting service in America. One of his unique ideas, he says that Gülen says the West, he sees West as a rival to compete with, not as an enemy. And why the reason, I'll explain, and later. And he says that since we are living in the modern age, a modern method of persuasion should be used to convince the people. Because another great scholar, Said Nursi, when he gave a sermon in 1911 at the Damascus Mosque with around 10,000 people, more than 100 great scholars, he said that the time of hostility is over. It is a time of persuasion because we are, you know, in the beginning of a modern age. People are not ignorant now. They are educated. They can read and write. He strongly opposes any kind of form of violence and terrorism. And also one of his another unique ideas is that cooperation between civilization. That notion was stated by him when Bernard Lewis wrote an article about the clash of civilization. Later, Samuel Huntington developed it as a book and published it, and it became very famous or very, debated throughout the world. So he proposed the cooperation between civilization, and later actually that became a policy of the United Nations even. There is a cooperation between civilization, between East and West. The Turkish Prime Minister and Spanish Prime Minister, they meet, I think, every other year in terms of the cooperation of civilization. You know, as mentioned, while many Muslim scholars encourage people to open mosques, Quran courses, he encouraged to open the schools. Then you can ask why. Because someone is doing something. Why should I do the same thing? Why we should not open, you know, the schools? Because if you look at the medieval times, even one of the great scholars, Imam Ghazali says, you know, seeking knowledge of medicine is obligation. When we look at the medieval times, when the Islam was flourished throughout the world, when established a civilization, what we call today in the West, secular sciences and religious sciences, they were taught side by side. And that continued till, mid 15th century, or actually till at the end of 15th century. And then we see that division happens. So that division happens gradually. It created some problems. Disunity. On one hand, intellectuals who graduate from the secular sciences. On the other hand, those who graduate from the religious schools learn religious sciences. And that gradually made division between the